You are huddled in the dim flicker of torchlight within a medieval bedchamber, the air thick with the acrid tang of burning tallow and the musky undercurrent of unwashed linens, as a procession of nobles and clergy presses close around the massive four-poster bed where a trembling bride and her groom are stripped bare by attendants, their bodies exposed to the leering gaze of witnesses who murmur prayers and crude encouragements. The room echoing with the rustle of fine fabrics and the heavy breaths of anticipation, while the couple is commanded to consummate their union right there, under the watchful eyes of all, the sheets soon to be inspected for bloodstains as proof of virginity and completion, a ritual that twists public duty into intimate violation, revealing the grotesque underbelly of what history has sanitized as chivalric romance. This scene, drawn from the heart of medieval Europe's aristocratic weddings, unveils a world where sexuality was not a private whisper, but a public spectacle, laden with bizarre customs that entangled power, religion, and the body's most primal urges in ways that shock our modern sensibilities. In the Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, sexual practices were governed by a labyrinth of ecclesiastical decrees, folk beliefs, and medical theories that blurred the lines between the sacred and the profane, turning acts of intimacy into rituals fraught with peril and absurdity. The Church, that towering arbiter of morality, preached chastity and procreation as the only sanctioned paths for carnal desires. Its own involvement in regulating and even profiting from prostitution exposed a hypocrisy as deep as the era's cathedrals were tall. Historical figures, from kings to commoners, navigated this terrain of taboo, their private dysfunctions and eccentric remedies hidden behind facades of piety and prowess, only to be revealed through surviving court records, medical treatises, and salacious fabliaux that chronicled the era's most outlandish behaviors with a mix of scholarly gravity and gossipy relish. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The Middle Ages brimmed with sexual practices that, to contemporary eyes, appear not merely peculiar, but grotesquely invasive, blending anatomical ignorance with superstitious fervor in pursuits that often courted disaster. One of the most startling customs was the bedding ceremony, a ritual reserved for aristocratic unions where the consummation of marriage unfolded before an audience of family, nobles, and church officials, their presence ensuring the legal validity of the alliance through witness penetration and the subsequent examination of bloodied sheets to confirm the bride's virginity and the act's completion. This was no mere formality. Court records from the era detail cases where marriages were annulled for insufficient witnessing, compelling couples to reenact the deed under stricter supervision, the chamber thick with the sense of sweat and incense, the participants' humiliation amplified by the onlookers' unsolicited advice and jeers, turning what should have been a tender union into a performative ordeal that prioritized property transfers over personal dignity. Equally bizarre was the practice of bundling, prevalent among rural folk in England and parts of continental Europe, where courting couples were bound together in a sack or separated by a wooden board in the same bed, ostensibly to foster acquaintance without allowing full congress. Yet historical accounts brim with tales of unintended pregnancies that mocked the barrier's efficacy. Parents encouraged this awkward intimacy, manufacturing special bundling bags that encased the pair in a cocoon of enforced proximity, the night's shared body heat and whispered confidences often igniting passions that splintered the plank or slipped the knots, leading to shotgun weddings and community scandals, all while religious leaders decried the custom as a gateway to sin without possessing the authority to eradicate it from ingrained cultural mores. Venturing into the realm of Aphrodisiacs, medieval cuisine transformed into a pharmacy of lust, with recipes prescribing the consumption of animal testicles, euphemistically termed stones, roasted, boiled, or pulverized into wines, believed to infuse the eater with virile essence drawn from bulls, rams, and boars. Sparrow brains, deemed potent enhancers of performance, featured in elaborate feasts alongside reproductive organs from various beasts, the doctrine of sympathetic magic dictating that ingesting fertility would beget fertility, while spices like pepper and ginger, traded at exorbitant prices, were prized not for flavor, but for their supposed ability to kindle sexual fires, turning wedding banquets into orgiastic preludes where every dish conspired to stoke desires that blurred the line between nourishment and erotic alchemy. The obsession with conception, timing elevated copulation to a cosmic endeavor. Couples consulting astrologers to align intercourse with favorable planetary positions, the waxing moon promising robust offspring, while specific saints' feast days were selected for their purported blessings on the unborn. Gender selection rituals grew increasingly outlandish, with men tying off their left testicle to conceive boys, rooted in the fallacy that males originated from the right side, amid a calendar riddled with prohibitions. No sex on Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, during Lent, Advent, menstruation, pregnancy, or breastfeeding, leaving scant windows for illicit encounters that demanded logistical precision rivaling military campaigns, often involving travel to auspicious locations where geography allège d'amplifier fertilité et chance. Fertility accessories adorn the body like talismans of desperation, women inserting conception stones, emeralds for boys, sapphires for girls, into their undergarments during the act, while girdles of Venus, inscribed with prayers and astrological symbols, encircled waists to invoke divine aid in procreation. Men donned rings on designated fingers or amulets stuffed with animal parts, their loincloths blessed by priests who charge fees for sanctifying these intimate artifacts, creating a lucrative ecclesiastical sideline that turned underwear into sacred relics, with elaborate manuals instructing on proper donning rituals and troubleshooting for failures, fostering a class divide where the wealthy flaunted gem-encrusted prophylactics, while the poor improvised with local herbs, refusal to accessorize properly, sometimes halting couplings altogether in a bizarre prerequisite for intimacy. Impotence trials thrust private failures into public scrutiny, courts summoning medical experts to inspect genitals and interrogate couples on their bedroom histories, culminating in the trial by Congress where pairs attempted intercourse under supervision in courthouse chambers, observers peering through peepholes as the clock ticked on mandated performances. Desperate men smuggled herbal enhancements, only to face further humiliations upon detection, while women endured examinations to prove their allure, the proceedings dragging for months with repeated sessions that shattered reputations, some husbands conceding annulment to evade the spectacle, their alleged deficiencies becoming fodder for tavern gossip and eternal stigma. The church's entanglement with prostitution unveiled a staggering duplicity. Bishops owning brothels in districts like London Southwark, licensing over 1,000 sex workers under regulations that dictated dress codes, operating hours, and mandatory medical checks, all while forbidding work on holy days. Profits from this necessary evil funded church constructions and festivals, the hierarchy rationalizing it as a bulwark against greater sins like adultery or sodomy, creating a pyramid of exploitation where prostitutes paid rents that funneled upward to ecclesiastical coffers, resistance to reforms underscoring the institution's vested interest in sustaining the trade despite its preached condemnations. Contraceptive methods veered into the perilous and absurd, women donning pouches of weasel testicles around their necks to ward off pregnancy, or imbibing potions laced with mercury and beaver glands that poisoned as often as they prevented. Sneezing post-coitus, induced by pepper, purportedly expelled seed, while vaginal barriers of honey-soaked wool or crocodile dung offered crude blockades, the era's inverted fertility calendar urging intercourse during menstruation, deemed most fecund, ensuring conceptions where avoidance was intended, magical rituals like backward church circumambulations adding layers of superstition to these hazardous endeavors. These practices escalated in their invasiveness and peril as societal pressures mounted, the initial curiosity of bundling devolving into rampant premarital pregnancies that strained family resources and inflamed clerical ire. While aphrodisiac feasts grew more extravagant among the elite, incorporating exotic imports that bankrupted households in pursuit of heightened libidos. The resultant overindulgences leading to reputed deaths from exhaustion, as chronicled in accounts of nobles like John of Gaunt, whose putrefied genitals were attributed to excessive fornications. Bedding ceremonies, once symbolic, became battlegrounds for political alliances, with failed consummations sparking wars over disputed inheritances, the public scrutiny fostering paranoia among grooms who resorted to increasingly desperate measures, from bloodletting to restore humoral balance to consulting witches for potency spells, only to face accusations of sorcery that compounded their woes. Timing rituals intensified with the integration of alchemical elements, couples ingesting mercury-laced elixirs to synchronize with celestial events, the side effects ravaging bodies and minds, birthing deformed offspring attributed to divine displeasure rather than chemical toxicity, while fertility accessories evolved into cumbersome apparatuses, women burdened with heavy amulets that chafed and infected, men encumbered by constrictive rings that impeded circulation, the church's blessing. Services ballooning into obligatory tithes that drained peasant savings, refusals branding couples as heretics and isolating them from communal support. Impotence trials ballooned in frequency during witch hunt frenzies, courts overwhelmed with cases where accused sorceresses were blamed for communal barrenness, the supervised sessions descending into farcical spectacles where crowds gathered for voyeuristic entertainment, participants' psyches fracturing under the strain, some men feigning success with prosthetics only to be exposed and flogged, women vilified as frigid temptresses, the verdicts often swayed by bribes rather than evidence, perpetuating cycles of injustice that eroded marital trust across societies. The church's prostitution empire expanded unchecked, brothels proliferating under episcopal oversight, the regulations growing draconian with enforced celibacy on feast days clashing against client demands, leading to underground rebellions where workers smuggled patrons, risking excommunication, the profits swelling to rival royal treasuries, funding crusades that ironically preached moral purity, the hypocrisy culminating in scandals where bishops fathered children with their charges, the revelations suppressed through inquisitorial threats that silenced whistleblowers. Contraceptive experiments turned lethal, potions incorporating arsenic and lead causing widespread infertility, epidemics mistaken for plagues, the sneezing method evolving into inhalant abuses that scarred lungs, barriers fermenting into infections that festered untreated, the magical components inviting accusations of witchcraft, with women burned for possessing herb bundles, the inverted calendars backfiring spectacularly during population booms that strained feudal resources, fostering famines where the unintended fruits of these practices starved en masse. In the twilight of these customs, death scenes often highlighted their tragic toll, as in the case of noble women hemorrhaging from abortifacients disguised as amenagogues, their final moments racked with convulsions amid blood-soaked linens, autopsies revealing corroded innards from chronic aphrodisiac overuse, the findings buried to preserve familial honor. Historical cover-ups abounded, chroniclers sanitizing records to omit public consummations or church brothels, attributing impotences to demonic influences rather than systemic abuses, preserved evidence emerging in fragmented manuscripts like the Perfumed Garden, listing euphemisms for genitalia that hinted at the era's obsessive lexicon, or court ledgers tallying annulments that whispered of failed trials. Autopsies, when conducted, exposed the ravages of mercury-laden contraceptives, uteruses scarred and barren, while ecclesiastical archives concealed ledgers of prostitution revenues, the truths leaking through fablios that satirized clerical hypocrisies, their graphic tales of cuckolded husbands and lascivious monks preserving the era's underbelly in veiled narratives. The physical remnants, like phallic badges from pilgrimages, survived as mute testimonies to aphrodisiac cults, their tin forms depicting winged phalluses that mocked the church's futile attempts at suppression. The cover-ups unraveling in later centuries through unearthed treatises that detailed succubi visitations as explanations for nocturnal emissions, blending theology with pathology in a desperate bid to rationalize the uncontrollable. Returning to that torchlit bedchamber, where the bedding ceremony unfolded in all its invasive horror, we now perceive it not as an isolated eccentricity, but as the pinnacle of a society ensnared by its own contradictions, where public facades of chivalry masked private realities of exploitation and desperation. These bizarre practices underscore universal themes about power's corruption of intimacy, humanity's ingenuity in pursuing pleasure amid peril, and the enduring quest for control over the body's mysteries, dynamics that persist in contemporary debates over reproductive rights and sexual ethics, reminding us that the Middle Ages' haunting images of bloodied sheets inspected by crowds, testicles devoured for vigor, and brothels bankrolling cathedrals echo in modern scandals where institutions grapple with their own hypocrisies, leaving us with a memorable specter of an era where desire's pursuit twisted into a grotesque tapestry of tragedy and farce.